Welcome to Grand Sumo Breakdown, the unofficial sumo podcast
for official sumo fans.
Welcome to Grand Sumo Breakdown. This is Ryan.
This is Jake.
This is Fleric.
This is Mac.
And this is going to be a special bonus episode. And this is actually going to be our status quo for the who knows how long. With the coronavirus, we will now be recording our podcasts remotely. So we are all within the comfort of our own home at this time. So audio is probably not going to be quite what you're used to. But on the flip side of that, we have a lot more free time, which means we have a lot more time to pump out some episodes. So less audio, more content. I call that a win.
Yep, that works for me. And in light of the coronavirus, it would be, I would appreciate it if everyone would, wipe down and clean your phone before listening to this, because I don't want any of us to get sick.
That would be very much appreciated.
I don't quite understand how the transmission works, but I think it would be better to be safe.
Transmitted via electricity and whatnot.
Time. Anyways, today, our episode, we are talking about Mongolians in sumo. Obviously, there are quite a few of them, and a lot of them have been very, very successful. But I wanted to start this, mini-series, you could call it, on Mongolians in sumo with everything that happened before Asashoryu. Asashoryu, of course, coming around...
That's a lot of things, Jake.
Yes, the entire history of everything in the world that has ever happened up to Asashoryu. But yeah, so just once we hit Asashoryu, the topic of Mongolians and sumo kind of turns into like biographies of each individual yokozuna, ozeki, etc. But this episode we're going to cover like what is Mongolian wrestling? How did it translate so well to sumo, and how did it get transferred to sumo? Like what started that? Because obviously there's a buttload of Mongolians in sumo now, but where did that connect? Like what happened that caused there to be only Mongolian yokozuna from 2002 to 2017 when Kisei was promoted?
Yes.
Oh, I'm going to start this story by saying that Mongolia effectively kicked everyone's ass for thousands of years. Up until
solid
opening line. I appreciated that one. I enjoyed writing it, and that's kind of the intro. And then Asashoryu happened, and they continued kicking everyone's ass.
But might have been some stuff in between, though.
Yeah, I guess why don't we cover a few of those details on this episode, and then we'll move on after that. But to paraphrase me and I'm sure Flaric's favorite book, Dune, hard places make hard people. So for thousands of years, the difficulties of living in the Eurasian steppe area made the people who lived there super badass. So like I'm not going to go into the entire history of that, but basically what that boils down to is a culture that is very focused on martial prowess and manly things like wrestling is what we're getting at. So Mongolian wrestling as an actual sport is thousands of years old. The very first reference that we can find is in cave paintings dating back to 7000 BC of two naked dudes grappling surrounded by a crowd. So the fact that there's a crowd there means it's for sport. It's a spectacle. It's a thing that they're doing for fun. And cave paintings means obviously super old and super important. You don't paint something on the wall of a cave if it's not important. Matt, go ahead.
So does this predate like the Greeks? Because I know the Greeks also had their form of wrestling and later became huge with the Olympics as a show of strength. So was this about the same time, or does this even predate the Greeks?
I don't know for sure, but I know what we know of classical Greece, like the classical Greek period where like we have pottery and we have paintings and the original Olympics. That's all in like the couple hundred BC. So I can't say for sure that it hadn't been around a ton longer than that. That's not something I looked into, but at least in Mongolia, there's been an unbroken tradition of this type, or at least this basic idea of wrestling for thousands of years. And I think it's important to note that the Mongolian civilizations, and I don't want to imply that there's like one Mongolian civilization. Like, it's very tribal. There's tons of different ethnic groups and different civilizations, but Mongolian group as a whole, it's very nomadic, and there isn't a whole lot of permanent structures, a lot of permanent art or anything like that. But the fact that we have cave paintings this old means that wrestling was a very important part of life. And that continued, especially all the way up through like the more famous Mongolian time periods of like Genghis Khan. This is kind of where wrestling became the first of the three manly arts. By first, I mean like most important. And Fleric, I know you did a little research on this one.
Yeah, I was going to say, what are the other three manly skills?
Two manly arts are archery and horsemanship.
No mustache growing?
That there are several sub-manly arts, but the primary three, of course, would be wrestling, horsemanship, and archery.
Okay.
These three manly arts, kind of the existence of them, the prominence of them, kind of forms the basics of the biggest local festivals in Mongolia, which to this day have kind of evolved into what's called the Nadam festivals. I apologize if I'm saying that wrong. Google really doesn't give me a whole lot of guidance on Mongolian pronunciation, but it won't be the last word or name that I get wrong in this episode, I'm sure. These Nadam festivals are essentially like local Olympics kind of a thing. So there's competitions of different sorts for these three manly arts.
Yeah, I have a note here that says it's locally termed as the 3 games of men. So that might be kind of maybe a translation or kind of what they think of the Nadam festival.
Right, and I believe Nadam technically is translated as just games. Oh yeah, that.
But of course, there's only 3 games to be played.
Yeah. They're the 3 games. That's all of them. Yeah, so that like I said, kind of forms the basis of like these large summer festivals where people get together. There are not necessarily one set of rules. Different ethnic groups with different tribal histories and such have different rules that they follow. But for the most part, it's basically sumo without a ring. This Mongolian wrestling is all about getting your opponent to the ground. And that kind of stems from actual warfare, where if you have a bunch of guys running around. Ryan, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, so that means there's no, obviously their terms would be different, but like Yorikiri or Oshidashi, it's all Uate Nage and Yori Taoshi and stuff like that. There's no ring to just step out of. Somebody's going to the ground.
Exactly. So yeah, that's where it kind of crosses over with a lot of other sports, a lot of other local traditional wrestling styles, judo, things like that. There's all sorts of emphasis on just getting your opponent to the ground. And that kind of stems from the idea that in actual warfare, when somebody goes to the ground, you're toast. Like if everybody's got swords and stuff like that, punching each other in the face may not be as effective if the other guy has a helmet on, right? But if you can get him to the ground, you and all of your other warrior buddies can go in there and clean up. Fleric.
So what you're saying, if you get the high ground, it's over.
Yes, exactly. So it's all about trying to find the high ground on a flat ground.
Yeah. Star Wars had it right the whole time.
Thank you, Fleric.
There you go. We got Dune and Star Wars. Let's see if we can find a way to work Star Trek and Doctor Who into this, and we'll hit all 4 major sci-fi groups. All 4 of our sci-fi food groups that we normally try to hit. But yeah, like I said, there's various rules, but in effect, the whole game is to get your opponent to the ground, and then the match is over. Very similar to sumo. But there are various rules of what counts for being down. So like one major variation is one of the varieties says you can touch the ground with your hand, and that's not a big deal. As long as like your knees, your elbows, your torso don't hit, or your head hitting the ground, things like that.
Obviously, taking some rules from football where it needs to be like an elbow or a knee down. Obviously influenced by American football.
Yeah, Mongolian wrestling dating back to 7000 BC definitely takes a little bit of influence from modern American gridiron football. You kind of spoiled my next bit there, where I revealed that yes, football players traveling in time is what really caused all this. Set all this in motion.
I knew it.
The outfit that wrestlers wear is also similar, but with some key differences to sumo. It's similar in that there's very little of it, which kind of traditional for a lot of folk wrestling traditions. In Mongolian wrestling.
Yeah, that seems to be the case for a lot of old time wrestling. 'Cause wasn't the original Olympics, I think, in the nude or in the buff?
Exactly. Yep.
Yeah, I was gonna say the wrestling might be 7,000 years old, but how old are the outfits that they actually wear? Like 200 years?
No, it's again, it kind of comes down to there being a million different varieties of this because there's a million different tribes and tribal traditions. But what's generally regarded as the modern era in Mongolian wrestling dates back to the 1920s. I can't say for certain exactly when this exact outfit that you would see today was official, but give or take 100 years is kind of the history where it's been, one sport. Similar to like how sumo has, 250 or so years where it's been pretty stable and recorded. But the outfit that Mongolian reps wear, it's basically just some sturdy underpants that you can grab and lift by, some nice big tall boots, primarily for like ankle protection and things like that, and also what's called a zodog, which is a jacket that doesn't have a chest to it or a collar to it or really a back to it. It's kind of just like two sleeves that are tied together. I would recommend looking up pictures because that was a terrible job of describing something that is already kind of hard to describe.
It's an anti-vest.
Yeah. There you go. See, you should have run this episode, Ryan.
Why do they have it so? Why do they have just only the sleeves?
Well, this was a story. I wasn't sure if I was going to find a way to cram it in here, but there's an unsourced. Here we go. There's an unsourced piece of information on Wikipedia. So, according to legend, on one occasion, a wrestler defeated all other combatants and ripped open the Zodog jacket to reveal her breasts, showing to all that she was a woman. From that day, the Zodog had to reveal the wrestler's chest, which is hilarious. That is like
they could not take it. They cannot take it at all. So they had to never again.
Yeah, Sumo will harm the crap out of them.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, so I would recommend looking up pictures because it is kind of a funky looking outfit. But the basics of how to do Mongolian wrestling has a ton of overlap with sumo. We're talking grips on belts. We're talking, headlock throws, arm lock throws, attacking with leg grabs, things like that. There's a lot of overlap. And like sumo, you can grab basically any part of your opponent. It's not like judo where in judo you have to use your hands. Your upper body fights their upper body and your lower body fights their lower body. Sumo, Mongolian wrestling, Greco-Roman wrestling, a lot of that is less limited. It's more just what can you do to get your opponent to the ground. But similar to sumo as well, there is a lot of emphasis on civility and on manners, dignity, etc. You always have to, if you get your opponent to the ground, you have to be the one to help them up, and that you always have to be courteous, and that's a big part of the tradition behind it. There's also various versions of traditional dance before and after a match, whether you're mimicking animals like a bird or a predator or something like that. That came from tradition, but kind of sticks around just because it's cool to do the thing that we've always done. and also because it, you can loosen yourself up like that and stretch out before your match. But that's another thing that kind of overlaps with sumo here. We got some tradition that kind of seeps its way into the actual rules of the game. Same way that sumo has a lot of warm-ups, a lot of tradition, salt throwing, etc. before the match. It just kind of becomes just as cultural as it is a sport. So that's the basics on what the sport itself is, and you can tell there's a lot of overlap here with a sport like sumo. And one of the most famous wrestlers of all time, I got to bring it up here because I might not be able to later, Hakuho's dad. Hakuho's dad, that he always, he would bring him up in interviews a lot about how he wanted to live up to his father's legacy. His father won the national title 6 times. And since there's only one national title per year, Hakuho always liked to compare that to 36 U-shows, or 6 years worth of tournaments. So that was one of his motivating
Hakuho's got his dad beat by at least 1 year of national championships.
and potentially still going here. But so that was one of his motivating factors after he had already gotten past the all-time record of U-shows. Hakuho still wanted to live up to his dad and through that 36 U-show. I mean, now who knows? He's just going to go until he can go. But that was always something for him. But so now that we know the sport, let me talk a little bit about Mongolia itself in the 20th century. So I'll be quick here. There's a lot of other places you can go to learn history, but suffice to say, in the 20th century, Mongolia, being surrounded on one side by Russia and the other side by China, was fairly heavily influenced by those two giant countries that had a ton of sway over a whole bunch of the world, especially countries that they surrounded. So Mongolia had all sorts of headaches came around when the USSR collapsed. So going from a communist country to a decentralized country economy, that's great and all, but the fact that it happened really, really quickly when the USSR fell led to a lot of inflation and food shortages. And I want to set that up because that could be a reason that somebody growing up as a young athletic teen, probably big guy, and your country's short on food, what's the most appealing thing that you can think of? Maybe a sport
thievery
required. What's that?
I was going to say thievery and beating up other people for their goods.
Oh,
could be manly Mawashis.
I was getting
clearly archery. Clearly archery.
What about a sport where you can travel out of your country that has food shortages and to a country where athletes are fed as much as they can eat, and part of the sport is to get as fat as possible?
Yeah, I can beat up foreigners just as well. Yeah,
that makes sense.
Exactly. So, what I'm getting at here is the early '90s, prime time to go over to Mongolia and maybe introduce a little bit of sumo and see if you can recruit some of them. Right. So the guy who saw this first and was the first guy to take action was Oshima Oyakata, the former Yokozuna Asahi Kuni. So let's do a quick bio on Asahi Kuni before we talk about his actual recruitment. He was born in 1947. He is still alive. He's 72. 72 being above the mandatory retirement age, so he's retired. But Asahi Kuni was a pretty small guy. I have made a mistake here. He was not a Yokozuna. I'm sorry. I'm mixing up two different figures. Asahi Kuni was an Ozeki, but he did not actually make it to Yokozuna. He didn't actually ever win any titles, but he came up. He was a runner-up 4 times. He was an Ozeki for give or take 4 years, and had a very, very successful career. But yeah, I apologize. I misspoke. He was not a Yokozuna. But getting back to his actual career, here we go. He's from Hokkaido, the northern island of Japan that has a ton of sumo history to it. And it took him about 5.5 years to get through the lower divisions. That's That's not necessarily very quick, but once he turned the corner, It only took him 2 basho to get through Juryo, and then the next 2 years hovering between Makuuchi and Juryo. But then after that, he spent the rest of his career in the top division. The rest of his career, which was a fairly long one, 16 years, he was active, and he was, like I said, the Ozeki for about he was an Ozeki for about the last 4 or so. He was especially he has a couple legendary stories to him. He is officially 5'8", 174 centimeters. And he allegedly only made that height requirement because of a knock on the head from a senior wrestler.
Wait, what?
Right. Oh, that's great.
So the swelling.
This was back when it was 170 was the limit, right?
I couldn't tell you for certain at that time, but yeah, he's officially registered at 174 centimeters. And this is in 1963 when he started wrestling.
Oh,
that's funny.
Yeah, so apparently only the swelling of getting smacked allowed him to get in there. He was often sickly. He actually had pancreatitis and sometimes had to commute to Bashas from the hospital, something that probably would not fly these days. But
I don't know.
I don't know with current like we said, we're recording this during the Ghost Basho where there's other health controversies going on at the same time here. So maybe that would fly today.
Yeah, for all we know, Ikioi is commuting from the hospital every single day.
He's been commuting for years. That tape is medical grade tape.
Asahi Kuni's nickname was the PhD of sumo. He got 6 technique prizes in his career. He was a very Enho-like wrestler in that he was all over the place and he had tons of different techniques. But he did specialize in grappling in particular. He preferred the right hand inside grip and regularly won by underarm throw, shitate nage. But yeah, he won by a bunch of different techniques. Very, very, very wide skill set. But he made Ozeki in the late 70s, but he was forced to retire in 1979 after his shoulder was broken against his best friend / best rival, Yokozuna Mie Noumi, in 1979. Those guys had kind of come up together around the same time, but that final match where his shoulder was broken was kind of what did it in for Asahi Kuni, and he had to quit after that. But fortunately, their friendship did survive the bout, and they did stay close. A year later, he formed Oshima Stable, 1980, against the wishes of his own coach. I can't find a whole lot of information on what that means, like why this was a big deal. But it was apparently bad enough that he and his coach didn't talk for years, even after that long technique. Go ahead, Flerick.
Yeah, it could be because maybe he took a bunch of promising people with him when he made his own stable. Because I think typically you wait a year and you kind of coach at the stable you've been a part of the whole entire time. And then you take a couple of your own people you've been training up to start your own stable. So maybe he took some really promising recruits or something along those lines.
Well, he didn't, even if that is the case, it didn't work out instantly for him. It did take him a little while before he started producing top-level wrestlers, but he did eventually produce 10 Sekitori in his coaching career, including Yokozuna Asahi Fuji. That's where I got my wires crossed there. But so he did produce a Yokozuna. He also coached both of his own sons, which I thought that was pretty cool. Neither of them made it to Sekitori, but they did both have, a decent career. They had their fun and all that. I'm sure it was great getting bossed around by their dad in front of other wrestlers. But in 1992, Mr. PhD of Sumo definitely saw an opening here. And this is where we get back to our Mongolia story. He started recruiting Mongolians in 1992. he went over to Mongolia and he held auditions, and he ended up picking 6 guys to bring back with him out of like over 100 people that auditioned and tried out here. But he brought back 6 guys in 1992 to try them out, see how they did in sumo.
And so that was before there was a restriction to 1 foreigner per heya, correct? Because that's fairly recent.
Yeah, I think that's like later 2000s when that went down.
Yeah, because all 6 of these kids that he brought over, they all joined the same stable here. Again, that's Oshima stable.
So the 6 kids that he brought over were all fairly small. We're talking like 80 or 90 kilograms,
as opposed to around 100 kilograms being like the normal. But I will note that the 2 most successful of these 6 guys were the 2 biggest of the group. So, I mean, take that for what you will. But the Mongolians that he brought over were smaller than average recruits. They were all born in 1973 or so. So these kids are, 18, 19 years old, give or take. If they were starting as young as possible as Japanese wrestlers, you might expect them to be starting at like 15 or 16. So it just goes to show that these guys that he brought over, who had, been doing judo or Mongolian wrestling, things like that, in Mongolia, they definitely didn't start from the same baseline that a Japanese kid would be starting in sumo generally.
Yeah, but they definitely did wrestling, because the Dom Festival was very, very popular, from the notes I have. They said something, I have a note, I think it's kind of funny, where they said, it's not uncommon to see a toddler wrestling a grown man in the Mongolian Nadam. So it was definitely very much a part of their blood, wrestling was.
Exactly.
But not specialized in sumo, like you were saying, Jake.
Exactly. So yes, there's a ton of overlap between the 2 sports, but they're not exactly the same. So yeah, there's definitely some learning they had to do, but they were not starting from zero at all. So the 6 guys that he brought over, I'm going to go in, in order from least to most successful. We have Asahi Taka, Kyoku Jishi, Kyoku Setsuzan, and if any of you say that you've heard of those 3, you are lying. But then there were the 3 more successful ones were Kyoku Tenzan, Kyoku Shuzan, and Kyoku Tenho. Those last 2 you may have heard of if you're somebody who's studied sumo over the last 15, 20 years, whatever. But those 2 are going to be the bulk of what we talk about here. But those top 3 stuck around for a while. The lower 3 really only stuck around for a couple basho. So Asahi Taka, for example, he went 28-13 over his career before it appears that there was some injury because he was on the Bansuke but absent for 4 more tournaments. Kyoku Jishi and Kyoku Setsuzan both did 2 tournaments. Both of those guys had 2 kachikoshis, but then they quit. And I'll get to why this happened, but it certainly wasn't due to lack of success in the ring. But all 3 of these guys did not have any makekoshis in the time that they did wrestle, except for one where Asahi Taka had 1. But regardless, these guys were fairly successful in the ring for new prospects is kind of the gist of what I'm getting at here. And I'm going to tell you the story of Kyoku Tenzan, and in here I will get to why those 3 quit. But Kyoku Tenzan wrestled from 1992 to 2007, never made it to Sekitori. He actually peaked in the upper Makushita range. Part of this is that he struggled to gain weight, and he kept getting injured. He ended up being Tsukebito to one of the other guys that we're about to get to, but the fact that he was in sumo for as long as he was and had just kind of stuck around in the culture for as long as he did meant that he was a role model for the next generation of Mongolian wrestlers, i.e. Hakuho, Asashoryu, etc. So this guy, he was fairly successful. Obviously, you got to be pretty dang good to get to the top of Makushita, but he did not have the kind of noteworthy success that we normally cover in history episodes like this. But he was instrumental in keeping Mongolian wrestling alive in sumo from what I have read, it seems like almost single-handedly, because this whole experiment almost exploded almost right away. So about 6 months in, we're still talking 1992 here. This is all happening in the same year. All 5 of the other guys, the other Mongolian wrestlers, ran off to the Mongolian embassy. They ran away from the Heya, all of them except for Kyoku Tenzan. These guys were homesick. The language was different. Culture shock. The training situation, the training culture was brutal. Obviously, we cover that all the time. But they couldn't take it, and the other 5 banded together, and they're like, you know what? We're going back to the embassy. They're going to figure out a way to get us home. We quit. This sucks.
Wow.
But Kyoku Tenzan, being the future role model to several Yokozuna here, he and Mrs. Coach is what I wrote in my notes, but the Oyakata's wife, he and Mrs. Coach made it to the embassy as well and convinced Kyoku Tenho and Kyoku Shuzan to come back with them. So he was able to keep at least a couple guys in there, and being able to convince those 2 to come back is particularly important because those are the 2 that were most successful out of this group. Kyoku Tenzan definitely deserves quite a bit of credit for being able to bring them back. He seems to be kind of like the emotional center of this little group. But other than that, he didn't have a particularly remarkable career. Like I said, he never even got to Sekitori, but he was a role model for a long time, Atsuke Bito to one of his other boys here. And he just kind of hovered around Makushita for a long time. He didn't miss very many matches. He was one of those Iron Men, he didn't miss any matches. In his 15-year career, he went 337 and 321 with 0 absences. So there isn't a whole lot to say about his career, I guess is what I'm getting at. Until 2007, the last year of his career, he did attract some controversy. He was spotted loitering around locker rooms in a way that led to speculation of match fixing, i.e. paying Asashoryu's opponents to lose. Obviously, he denied this. He said he was just advising younger Mongolians, but, it's still kind of shady.
Yeah.
Right. So I'm sure it's just a coincidence that this is the same year he retired.
No, come on.
All the big names did show up when he retired. Hakuho, Asashoryu, who are a huge deal by this time. His other Kyoku buddies, Kyoku Shuzan and Kyoku Tenho. It was a big deal. This guy was important despite not having a Sekitori career. But he did, before he retired, he did get Japanese citizenship in 2005. And yet, for reasons that are completely unknown to the world, because Wikipedia is the only place that stores information, he moved to Germany with his wife to start a business, had a daughter right around then when he retired, and then he kind of fades from the history books, i.e. the end of the Wikipedia page. Okay, so next after Kyoku Tenzan, we're going to move up the success ladder to Kyoku Shuzan. Kyoku Shuzan was quite a bit bigger. He wrestled from 1992 to 2006, so pretty much the same time span of career as Kyoku Tenzan. He actually had ambitions of being a policeman as a kid, but because of the ads when recruiters were coming over, he ended up trying out for Sumo. And he did well because he had a long history as a Mongolian wrestler. He made it to Juryo after 3 years, spent about 1.5 years there, and then he was a mainstay in Makuuchi for, the last 10 years of his career or so. He immediately rocketed up to Komatsubi. Unfortunately, that was his peak. He usually ended up in the upper Magashira ranks, a single-digit Magashira. And I think that part of his issue here may have been that he was over promoted slightly. The records that he got were not necessarily. We'll say that he got lucky on the Bansuke. So he started at Magashira 15, moved up 8 ranks with just a 9-6 record. Ooh. Then he moved up another 4 ranks with just an 8-7 record. And then he moved up another 4 ranks to his all-time peak with a 9-6 record. So three tournaments where he did no better than 9 wins, and all of a sudden he's a komusubi, where reality shows up again, and he goes 4-11.
That makes a little more sense.
Yeah, that's a little bit more realistic, isn't it? But yeah, so he stuck around, like I said, in the upper Maegashira ranks, usually somewhere between like 2 and 6. Obviously, there's somewhere he goes a little higher, somewhere he goes a little lower, but he was kind of in that zone where he picked up kinboshis left and right. Mac, go ahead.
What was the competition like at this point? I mean, normally when you see jumps like that, it's because maybe the middle of the field's weak, or you've got a lot of maybe changing of the old guard, you got a lot of new up-and-comers coming. Just to give us an idea, do you know what he was running up against at that point?
My barely educated opinion is that we did have some solid competition up at the top. This was an era where we had part of this era, he had 4 Yokozunas to compete with. We're talking both of the American Yokozunas. We're talking Takanohana and Wakanohana, the brothers that were both Yokozuna. We had Konishiki towards the beginning of this. That's my best guess, but I'm not. I haven't done it. Yeah. I mean, that's purely a guess, but it could be that it was just kind of a top-heavy league at the time. But either way, it's no easy task to get to komusubi at all, let alone still get 4 wins while he was up there. He hovered around that rank for a while, but still very successful career. A very successful career just for somebody who went out on a limb, went to a new country as a teenager, and kicked a bunch of ass. So I thought he's the second most accomplished of this first generation here. So here's a couple funny stories about it though. He was very popular back in Mongolia. So he established charities, and he studied while he was still active. Again, like his desire to be a policeman was kind of one of his things. Kind of a weird parallel, because that sounds awfully familiar to Harumafuji, doesn't it?
I was going to say, yeah.
Making me think about that.
There probably was a lot of kind of role models through this time.
Yeah, for sure. I haven't found anything explicitly saying this, but I think it's easy to infer that Kyoku Shuzan was probably at least a little bit of a role model for Harumafuji. Another funny story here, he got a kinboshi in 2003 over Asashoryu, and that pissed Asashoryu off so much that Asashoryu ended up getting DQ'd for pulling his hair in the next basho.
Oh.
And here's the thing, though. He didn't get a kinboshi for that one because the Yokozuna got disqualified. He didn't beat the Yokozuna. And it is the first time in recorded sumo history that a Yokozuna got a DQ.
I wonder if that would start pissing off the Sumo Association when it comes to Asashoryu.
Just a little, maybe.
Yeah, I don't think Asashoryu ever did anything else that would piss off the Sumo Association. Tune in next time on Mongolians in Sumo for the reason that is a very funny joke. Anywho, I'm going to tell you the facts before I tell you the rumors, but the facts of his retirement, he retired very abruptly 2 days into the final tournament of 2006, citing heart trouble. He had his retirement ceremony back in Mongolia with the prime minister in attendance, which is pretty cool. Prime minister gave him his personal thanks for helping international relations. Then he went back to Japan for a top knot cutting ceremony at the Kokugi-kan in 2007. And then he moved on, and that's nothing controversial about that whatsoever, right? Although it did come out afterwards that he was being extorted by gangsters who were looking for...
What?
Yeah, so they were looking for money and shady business deals, and when it didn't go well, they smashed up the Heya. So, yeah, seriously, they smashed up the Heya, broke the windows, drove a car into the Heya.
Oh,
yeah, pretty big deal there. But yeah, heart trouble indeed is what I have in my notes here.
Well, it takes some serious guts to ram a car through any kind of training stable where you have 400+ pound men that are just in there throwing around weights like they're nothing. That's some serious guts.
Yeah.
I'm willing to bet they probably didn't do it during actual practice, because those gangsters that's a bad idea. But yeah, so 2008, he was after this whole thing had passed, he was briefly in the Mongolian parliament, but he also stayed active in recruiting wrestlers, and he estimates himself that he recruited 25 wrestlers, which pretty cool. That's a good haul. But
probably people we know.
Oh yeah. Last thing before we move on to our final wrestler of today, I looked up his Namiyama stats, where we compare his winning techniques and losing techniques to what the average amount of techniques, the average amount that certain techniques get used today. So this is going to be a theme every time we talk about a Mongolian wrestler, but he was extremely grapple focused. So Kyoku Shuzan won by Yorikiri. It was his most common winning technique, but he still used it only a little bit more than half as much as people normally use it. He only used it 15% of the time, which is crazy for that being his top stat. Most people, their top stat is in the 30s or the 40s or something, whether it's Yorikiri or Oshidashi or what have you. But only 15% because he's got a whole bunch of techniques that he used fairly often, and they are all throws except for two. He was very heavy on the Uwate Nages, the Shitate Nages, all the classics there. He's got some pulling techniques mixed in there. But just to put it in perspective of how focused he was on grappling, he only used Oshidashi about 15% as often as normal. He was not into the pushing. Conversely, he lost by pushing all the time. So,
well, when you've got a pulling technique as one of your majors, like that's a double-edged sword.
Yeah, if you're good in grapple situations, because that's what you do all the time, then you're probably not as good defending against pushing techniques. Mm-hmm. So he lost by Oshidashi and Tsukidashi and Okuridashi, all these other techniques a lot more often than normal. And similar to what we're going to say anytime we bring up Namiyama stats for a wrestler. But that was just the last bit that I wanted to cover, just so you have a picture of how Kyoku Shuzan liked to wrestle. Lastly here, our last and most successful of this first generation of Mongolian wrestlers is Kyoku Tenho. Kyoku Tenho, who is still in the Shimpan on active matches these days. If you look up a picture of him, maybe you can recognize him during the broadcast. But he's there a lot. He is now. Let's see. He took on. Yeah, he is now Tomozuna Oyakata. For a little while, I'll cover this at the end. But he immediately went into coaching and was immediately very good at it. But sumo names being complicated what they are, if you hear about him now, you are hearing about him as Tomozuna Oyakata. But he is the biggest of these guys in this generation. He's 6'3", only one of these guys that was over 6 foot. And in his actual wrestling prime, he was about 150 kilograms. So that's, about average for a wrestler today, if a little tall. But his most important attribute here was his durability and his longevity. He wrestled from 1992 until 2015.
Wow.
That is a heck of a career. That is 23 years. He has a bunch of records, including the most bouts in Makuuchi. He is 200 or so ahead of Kota Shogaku and Hakuho, who are next up on that list. He has the 6th most wins and the 2nd most overall bouts of all time. He has the 2nd most basho in the top division at 99. And he's second place to the great Kaio, who basically has all the records that Kyoku Tenho does not have. He came in, surprisingly, with very little experience in combat sports. He probably got by in those original auditions just because he's gigantic. But his main sport that he played before getting into sumo was basketball.
Can't teach height.
What's that?
You can't teach height.
Yeah, exactly. And being 6'3", it's not super surprising he was good at basketball either. But he had not a super rocket ship strapped to his back kind of rise. It took him 4 years to get to Juryo, and then another 2 or 3 before he really solidified his stay in Makuuchi. He made it up to Sanyaku a handful of times, 12 basho overall, but he was mostly just upper Megashira. And he got 7 prizes, all of them fighting spirit in his career. So quite a few of them, but I think it says a little bit about his technique here that they're all for just the fighting spirit, nothing else. He did get 2 kinboshis. So like all the other guys, he was involved in the embassy incident where they ran away out of homesickness. But yeah, like Kyoku Shuzan, he did come back and really solidified and gave it his all to stay in the Sumo Association and never looked back. He got his Japanese citizenship in 2005, but he was not without controversy in this long career. In 2007, he crashed a car, similar to who was it? Maybe 2 years ago. Was that Osunarashi?
Osunarashi.
Yeah. So he didn't have to retire over this, though, but he was reprimanded and suspended. So they dropped him down to Juryo, because he was suspended, he ended up getting dropped down to Juryo. But that really lit a fire under his ass because he got 12-3 in the next 2 basho. He went from Maegashira 2 down to Juryo 3 and all the way back up to Maegashira 4 in this whole weird whirlwind incident. But he was the first guy in 20 years to be a Sanyaku wrestler who dropped down to Juryo and then made it back up to Sanyaku. So complete whiplash, but it was it just goes to show how he absolutely did belong at the top, and it was purely scandal related, not talent related, that ended up having him drop down to Juryo. In 2012 here, Asahi Kuni, the guy who recruited him, / Oshima Oyakata, however you want to call him, retired 2012 here. It was assumed that Kyoku Tenho was going to take over, but he was still highly ranked and very healthy. So instead of taking over Oshima stable, the entire stable was absorbed by Tomozuna Beya, including Kyoku Tenho here. So this was kind of strange. That's why even though he was part of Oshima stable almost his entire career, he never actually had that name. He went from Kyoku Tenho, and when he did eventually take over his stable, it was now Tomozuna stable. So kind of a weird back and forth there. But in 2012, after this stable absorption, this is mind-blowing to me, being a fan in 2020. He won a Yusho in a tiebreaker over Tochi Ozan.
What?
Who? Tochi Ozan?
Yeah.
Him?
You know that he had a tiebreaker loss for a Yusho?
Tochi Ozan?
No,
the same.
I don't believe it. I don't believe it.
This doesn't sound right.
Yeah.
No.
That's
crazy.
This is May of 2005. And yeah, both of those guys, they went 12-3. Kyoku Tenho winning this meant he was the oldest Yusho winner ever at 37. So
wow.
that is older than Kota Shogaku, Hakuho, Hamafuji are now.
I mean, Hakuho is only 34, 35 at this point. He's not even 37.
Exactly. Kota Shogaku is similar, same age, but I was just bringing up those guys because those are kind of the senior citizens in Makuuchi now.
I think Shohozan will be the oldest in Makuuchi right now. I think he's like 36 somehow.
Yeah, Yoshikaze and who was the other short guy that retired old recently? Takekaze. Thank you.
Takekaze, yeah.
But yeah, so this Yusho win that he got, it was the first Maegashira win in 11 years. And it was the
That's
first...
old hat now.
What's that?
That's old hat now. Maegashira win every other basho nowadays.
Yeah, but it was a big deal then.
Yeah.
So this is funny. This is a thing that has happened 3 times. Or excuse me, this is a thing that had not happened in 50 years, but he won the Yusho and did not even make it up to the Sanyaku ranks. What's funny about this to me, he went from Maegashira 7 to Maegashira 1. So he only got those 6 ranks from a 12-3 playoff Yusho win. But what's funny is that in the 3... Yeah. Sorry, go ahead, Ryan.
Yeah, I just said that's a little underpromoted, but there's probably guys in like the Sanyaku ranks that all had winning records that he couldn't jump ahead of.
Yeah, so it's not... The reason that it's not all that weird is because 2 of the 3 times since that a Maegashira has won, they have not made it to Sanyaku. That being
he was a trendsetter. He was a trendsetter.
Yeah, exactly. That being Asanoyama and Tokushoryu, who both won from the Maegashira ranks and did not get all the way up to the Sanyaku in the next tournament. Yet again, we got a record for being old as hell. Kyoku Tenho was the first wrestler to turn 40 while active in the entire 6 basho era. So that's going back to 1958. So in like give or take 60 years, nobody had made it to 40 while they were active. After his 12th loss in Nagoya of 2015, he left the ring in tears, knowing that he would be Juryo bound. He was at Maegashira 11, and getting only 3 wins is not going to do it. He was quoted as saying, "I have run out of strength and don't have the spirit anymore." So he called it quits then, mid 2015, like I said.
He probably I bet he followed that up with, "And also my knees. Dear goodness, my knees."
Probably.
Yes. My body is also a garbage sack filled with bones that doesn't work. But he immediately took over coaching at Tomozuna Stable. There was a period of transition, but yes, he became Tomozuna Oyakata, and was the first Mongolian to head a stable, which absolutely deserved that after more than 20 years, almost all of it in Makuuchi. That was a hell of a career. And let's take a look at how he liked to wrestle. So, shockingly, he used a lot of grappling and throwing techniques. However, unlike who we looked at previously, Kyoku Shuzan, Kyoku Tenho did a ton of Yorikiri. 48.8% of all of his wins were by Yorikiri. 55% of all of his losses were by Yorikiri. He was not as exciting a wrestler as Kyoku Shuzan. But yeah, after Yorikiri, it's, we've got the Iwate Nage, Yoritaoshi, Sukui Nage, Kote Nage, all the classics, all the classic throws with a handful of pulling techniques moved in there. But yeah, his Oshidashi, he only won by Oshidashi 19 times in those 20 years. Like, how nuts is that? That's like Taka Keisho winning on the belt, kind of a stat.
Or Abi.
Part of the
Yeah,
exactly. He did lose by Oshidashi. It was his second most common losing technique, but it was still only half as often as normal. But that is the career of Kyoku Tenho. And after this 1992 wave, there were not a whole lot of other Mongolians, which I think is kind of strange. I think it might have just been that people were worried it was a fluke. People didn't think it was worth the effort to go and recruit around the world. Until 1999 or so to 2002-ish, there was the second generation. This includes all 4 Mongolians who have made it to Yokozuna, and Arawashi, who is substantially older than I thought he was back when he was wrestling.
Ow.
But we've kind of had just
recently retired a couple of Basho ago. Arawashi did.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So yeah, all those guys, fairly long careers here. We kind of had a trickle since then. Tamawashi is 04, Chiyoshima is 09, Terano Fuji 2011, Ichinojo 2014. We got Mitoryu and Hoshoryu in 2017, but that's kind of where, you know, there aren't huge waves anymore. It's kind of a market that is no longer novel, and there's not really any more prodigies out there that haven't heard of sumo as an option. Flair, go ahead.
Yeah, a couple probable good reasons. I think one, the biggest one you mentioned is beforehand was the economy in Mongolia. I think has improved since then. And I remember reading something where Olympic sports are kind of a little bit more popular now than maybe looking towards sumo like it once was. And the other big thing that Ryan alluded to was the one foreigner per heya rule. And so it's kind of by design sumo wanted to become a trickle and not like a huge wave like it was in the past.
Yeah, when people that aren't from your country are better than you at your country's national sport, there's definitely a bit of pride that comes into play, right?
That's a little.
And maybe with all the gangster Yakuza stuff that was happening, maybe that could have been part of it too. Like where they just saw, maybe, I don't know.
Yeah, and I mean,
Yakuza's
not going to try to explain that more.
Yakuza doesn't exist.
Yeah.
Even since all these guys we've talked about, there's been the Haruma Fuji incident. Who's the other guy who had to retire recently? Mongolian Magashira.
Takanoiwa.
Takanoiwa, thank you. I was totally blanking on that. So it could also be a bit of reluctance to recruit somewhere where you have had scandal-bound Rikishi come from. I don't know. There's a number of factors here that have kind of slowed down the tidal waves of getting annihilated by foreign wrestlers here. But yeah, it's also, you got to consider that for a long time, Mongolia's best athletes were getting attracted to Mongolian wrestling, being like their top sport. The same way, like in America, if you are an absolute A+ level athlete, what are you doing? You're doing football, right?
Or basketball if you're really tall.
Yeah. Or if you're some sort of stretched out, spindly, dorky looking guy, you bulk up and you play basketball. But yeah, so like Mongolian wrestling being the sport in that particular region of the world meant it attracted all of their best athletes. So that first wave, and especially that second wave, you were getting like the absolute cream of the crop genetically, as well as people that have a background in a sport that is super, super well defined as one that can translate to sumo. So that wave that we got around the year 2000 is probably the last time that a wave that large and that powerful is gonna come through into sumo, unless there's some other completely untapped market that we don't know about. But I don't really think that's the case. So we'll probably still get more Mongolians. We get one or two notable ones every other year or so, but it's not going to be a complete annihilation the way that 4 Yokozunas starting in a 3-year span is going to be, right? So that's all I got for this outline here. Is there any other questions? Anything else you guys wanted to discuss? Ryan, go ahead.
Yeah, so you had mentioned there are 3 manly arts: horseback riding, archery, and wrestling. I want us to figure out which one of us would fit into each of those categories. So I'm going to take myself out of the horseback riding one. Those guys are killing machines, and I will never be close to one again in my life. But I think it'd be an interesting debate to see who would be our best horseback rider, our best archer.
Archer?
Yeah. No, I'm going to go with archer. And best wrestler.
Best wrestler.
Wrestler.
I'm gonna stake my name as best wrestler, as I have been watching WWE most extensively out of everybody. I feel like I've picked up a few things as I have watched that, so I think I could throw you guys around a ring quite a bit better than you could me.
Your skill on the mic will be like just so impressive to everyone.
Yeah, exactly.
I would say being the only one here who has any training in actual grappling arts, I was about to submit myself for this, and then I remembered I'm also the smallest, and also jiu-jitsu only happens on the ground, so that's kind of the most useless thing.
Yeah,
I still give favorite to Jake on the wrestling part, I would say.
I don't know. Mm-hmm. His training is like limited, like 1 hour sessions for like a period of 2 months, once a week.
Oh, it was more than a year, and it was fun, but it was also really expensive and sweaty, and those are like two things I don't like.
Expensive and sweaty.
Obviously, I win wrestler. So let's move on to best archery-er.
I guess I'll throw my hat out because it's kind of like throwing frisbees, but not really. I don't know. I'm pretty sure I don't, under these definitions, I'm probably not the manliest of man out there.
I mean, it's kind of like if you can dodge a wrench, you can dodge a ball. If you can throw a frisbee, you could throw an arrow.
It depends what you say. I remember reading that technically what the three mainly arts are. It's archery, it's horseback riding, then it's durability. And durability usually kind of means wrestling. If we open durability to something else, go ahead, Jake.
The Mongolian word for Mongolian wrestling is directly translated to durability.
Yeah.
So if you saw durability, it was probably just referring to wrestling, but by the word that they use for it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I was trying to find another definition of durability. So if we're talking like Netflix marathons, you know, I got some endurance there.
I'd throw my hat in for the archery. I'm actually not that bad with a bow.
You can use a bow or win.
Yeah, if you actually know that about yourself, that means you definitely know more about archery than any of the other ones of us.
Exactly, yeah. All right, horseback riding. I'll be the horseback rider of the group. Let's go.
Now that, to me, Fleric, that makes sense just because of your natural disposition. The horse would just be like, all right, where do you want to go, man? Like, you're awesome. Where do you want to go?
We'll be best buds right away.
Exactly.
I would throw my hat in this ring as well because I have actually ridden a horse. Have either of you?
I have once.
Okay, then we are on similar levels of experience then.
Yes,
kind of horse.
I rode one horse for about half an hour at the Girl Scout camp that Katie ran back when we were in college. Mm-hmm. It was fun.
Okay, all right.
I like Magic. He was a dude. He was awesome.
Yeah. Mine was also at a camp, but I was much younger.
Right, so we have it settled.
You got the skill ingrained in you at a young age, and so it has germinated and grown as you've aged, therefore making you the superior horseback rider.
Must be.
It sounds like we have Fleric the horseback rider, Mac the archerer, and Jake and Ryan have to settle this in the ring.
I think so.
I mean, there's no really other way to do it, yeah. To determine the best wrestler or the most durable, that's the only way to do it. And as your specialty is lying on your back, I have a very good feeling about this.
Gotcha. Yeah, so we need to settle which is the better style between jiu-jitsu and pro wrestling, and we need to settle this by doing a sumo match.
Like this,
but unfortunately, that's going to have to wait for who knows how long before I'm touching literally anybody except for my wife. It could be months.
Yeah.
All right. Again, that'll be enough time to get some advertisement out there and make it happen.
Yeah.
You better start training. I better hear some weight loss stuff from more of you.
Yeah, staying indoors 24/7.
Weight classes don't exist.
Oh, we're doing the Mongolian wrestling now, Flag. So weight classes
don't exist in Mongolian either.
Oh, okay, fair enough.
You hear the story about the toddler and the adult, like
that wasn't
a really big toddler.
It must have been.
Me and Ryan will figure out a way to somehow stay in quarantine, but settle this via wrestling, and I think that'll just about do it.
Yeah, this has gone off the rails quite fast.
Indeed, and it's lovely.
That was my goal.
Well done.
So if you enjoyed this podcast, you can leave us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts or your favorite podcast listening service, which now includes Spotify.
Ooh. You can find us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Grand Sumo Breakdown.
Blog is grandsumobreakdown.wordpress.com, but I'm pretty sure it also gets you there if you go to grandsumobreakdown.com, which I meant to say originally.
Have any questions, comments, or corrections, drop us a line at grandsumobreakdown@gmail.com, which would probably be the safer way of contacting us during these troubled times. Or give us a call at 805-613-7866. That's 805-613-SUMO. We are lonelier than ever now that we are isolated, particularly Ryan.
And one last note on Mongolian wrestlers. We are also looking to do an episode on Biamba, the recently passed away Mongolian wrestler who hung out in the United States quite a bit and spread the word about sumo and all that. So again, one more call for any Biamba stories that you would like us to discuss and share on the podcast.
All right, so as we mentioned at the top of the episode, we are all quarantined with nothing to do, so we're planning on doing more bonus episodes as we come up with ideas and topics. I think we might even be recording one tomorrow as well, so look out for those in the coming days. We also have the review episode, so just keep an eye out. You'll get a lot more episodes from us than usual in these hard times, we'll call it.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to Grand Sumo Breakdown. Until next time, throw your salt high
and keep moving forward.
Out like a live video, or we just doing this so we can see each other.
No, we're not dealing with that.
Okay, I'm okay with that. I just wanted to make sure that I could like strip naked and walk around during this.
Yeah.
You don't have to.
Business up top, party down below.
Okay,
that's what we're going with.
That's fair. All right, so we all ready to go?
I believe so.
And I got the naked discussion saved for a little nugget here.